Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Samstar33, and welcome to the latest edition of Mix Up, of course it is. And today we're going to be covering one of the new cards from the Dark Explorer set, and that card is Groudon EX. Now, when Groudon EX was first confirmed back all the way in September, when Psycho Drive and Hail Blizzard came out back then in September, I was crazy about this card. I just was like, well, there's so many things that can work with it, all the stuff, things, and I was just I was annoyed that it didn't come out in next Destinies, but now finally, 8 months later, we finally get the card, and he's definitely one you should be looking out for. And also, hope you like the new format I'm going to be making the videos in. Hopefully it'll be a little less bad, I guess I should say. So, let's get down to the card review of the day.
So as you can see, the format of these videos is definitely going to change up quite a lot. I hope my audio quality is not too bad, but anyway, definitely going to be a lot better than just, zooming in on my computer screen, which is just awful quality. I know, wasn't really professional at all. So without further ado, let's get to the card of the day, which is of course Groudon EX. So if we look at Groudon EX's stats, you can see right off the bat that he has some pretty good stats. He's a fighting type, so lightning decks such as Zekrom EX Electric, and dark decks such as Darkrai EX Zoroark and Zoroark Weavile, or just plain Darkrai, will definitely fear this card, but obviously cards like Tornadus and Tornadus EX will definitely not be your best opponents. He has 180 HP, which is standard for an EX. Nothing too amazing, but, can't complain. Weakness to water is definitely a nice weakness in this format. The only Pokemon that will be able to one-shot you are Kyurem EX, which is only really seen in the Truth and some Cake builds, so both of those decks aren't very playable, and not many people use them. And of course the new Empoleon card, which isn't going to see enormous play, but might be a problem if your area is filled with the card. Resistance to Lightning is definitely fantastic in this format right now, with all the Zekrom EX Electric being, best deck in the format and whatever. Definitely a great thing to have. Retreat cost of 4 is pretty bad, obviously. Not going to get much worse than that. But you can search him out with Heavy Ball, which if paired with Terrakion could be decent. And you can also maybe use Darkrai EX with Prism Energies to help get him to free retreat with its Dark Cloak ability, which I'm pretty sure that does work. Correct me if I'm wrong, but, I'm pretty sure that does. But since we're done looking at his stats, look at his attacks, and he does have some pretty good ones. Tromp, for 1 Fighting Energy and 1 Carlos Energy, does 20 damage and does 10 damage to each of your opponent's benched Pokemon, which can set up some pretty nice combos. It's a decent spread. It's just maybe like with Kyurem or something. It's a little faster than Kyurem, so just a decent attack, especially when paired with its second attack, Giant Claw, which for 2 Fighting and 1 Carlos, does 80 damage and says that the defending Pokemon already has 2 or more damage counters on it. This attack does 40 more damage, which is 120 damage total. And if you count the 2 damage counters that should already be on it, when setting up the attack, it should be a total of 140, which can KO basically anything that isn't in EX in this format. Nothing really has much higher HP. Of course there's Legends, but those take 2 prices as well. Obviously Tromp is a very good way to set this up. Use that a couple times, and then Giant Claw and everything on an opponent's side of the field will definitely have to fear this card greatly. And a lot of people have been talking about using him in mono fighting decks like Terrakion, Tracheon Landorus, and those types of variants, which is definitely a great home for him, but I think a good balance would be ones that really focus on trying to set up his attack and go well with him, such as a combination between the two. There's also some other decks that I've thought of, ones that spread and help him set up, ones that are good combos with him. But anyway, let's take a look at some cards and some decks that might see some play with Groudon EX. First card that I think will go very well with Groudon EX is Rocky Helmet. Now this is a pretty common card in a lot of decks, but this one especially helps Groudon EX if you don't remember what it does. Basically, it's a tool card, and it says, if the Pokemon this card is attached to is your active Pokemon and is damaged by an opponent's attack, even if it's knocked out, put 2 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon, which sets up Groudon EX's Giant Claw perfectly. If any of your opponent's Pokemon try to attack it, they'll just take 2 damage back, and they're not going to one-hit KO it, most likely, unless they're a very high-powered Mewtwo EX or a Water Pokemon. But it's still just a great card that goes very well with Groudon EX, and it will definitely be in 99% of the decks that use Groudon EX, except some of the mono fighting decks, because those have EXP share. So the next card I think will go pretty well with it is Landorus, and this one's pretty obvious. If you don't remember, Landorus' second attack, Gaia Hammer, does 10 damage to all players' bench Pokemon, which will set up the opponent's attacks just as well as Tromp will. And of course, since he's a fighting type, you can pair him very well with Groudon EX and Terrakion. So a deck with all three of them will definitely be pretty successful. Definitely not tier 1 or anything, but definitely a deck that could compete in the metagame. Just because like 60 or 70% of your Pokemon actually help set up Groudon EX, which would probably be your main goal in the first place, unless you're fighting a lightning deck, which you can already kill everything in the deck with anyway. And the third card that I think goes very well with Absol in a lot of situations, just in my opinion, was one I spotted pretty early on when this card was first confirmed, which is known as Absol Prime. And if you don't remember, Absol Prime is getting a pretty big boost in this format because of all the dark tools and such and all the dark decks that are coming out. So Absol Prime will be seeing play in that, but it'll also be seeing play in combination with Groudon EX because of its first attack, Eye of Disaster, which is as long as Absol is your active Pokemon, whenever your opponent puts a basic Pokemon from his or her hand onto their bench, but 2 damage counters on that Pokemon, which is again a great way of setting up Groudon EX's attack. As long as they don't catch you around Absol, this is a really great way to defend it because they can't, avoid it or anything because the Pokemon was obviously just placed down. Anyway, now that I've taken a look at some cards that go very well with Groudon EX, now let's take a look at some decks that I think Groudon EX will create with its very existence. So let's get down to that as soon as possible. So the first deck idea I have with you today is Groudon EX and Landorus, which is essentially a mono fighting deck with Groudon EX as your main attacker. So let's look at the cards one by one and see how they all fit in. Groudon EX, as you can see, I run 2 of it because it's an EX and you don't need that many of it. And probably some of the other Pokemon will be used a lot of the time for the most part, at least in the early game and sometimes in the mid game. So anyway, the next card, Landorus, is used with high copies of 3, which is because you want to start with him most of the time to set up pretty quickly. You can get about turn 2 if you get Abundant Harvest set up pretty well. The turn 2, 80 damage to the active and 10 damage to the bench is definitely a good thing to have. And 2 Terrakion is there, just in case you want a heavy hitting attacker that can take out Darkrai EX and Zekrom EX. So Terrakion is just good in any mono fighting deck. So that includes some copies of him. I only have 2 just because you're probably only going to be using him once or twice. So now let's look at the trainers, which of course in mono fighting decks is the majority of the deck. 4 Junk Armor is pretty obvious just to get back those essential trainers when you really need them. 4 Dual Balls so you can get out the Pokemon that you want as soon as possible. With Heavy Ball you can't search out Landorus, but you could run a couple Heavy Balls just if you want some more reliable search cards. Lost Remover is obviously a pretty big staple in mono fighting decks by this point because the deck has so much space that you might as well include a pretty good and solid card like Lost Remover. 3 Pokemon Catcher is pretty obvious, it's just a good card. 4 EXP Share, which is obviously a pretty big part of mono fighting decks. It's their main energy acceleration, and obviously most decks nowadays need to have that, otherwise they're just gonna, be terrible. Next we have 1 Rocky Helmet. You might say like, why would you need that since all the EXP shares are going to be attached to your Pokemon, you won't have room for something like Rocky Helmet. But this is just in case you want to put it on your first Pokemon to get some more damage on that Pokemon. So that's why Rocky Helmet's here. 4 Professor Juniper, and 3 Pont and 3 N is for consistency. Normally in this deck you'd have 4 Pont and 3 Juniper, or maybe you'd have 4 of each. The reason I have 4 Juniper is so you can set up Landorus a lot easier than you normally would be able to. So that's the reason why there's more Juniper. Black Belt is again another decent staple in mono fighting decks just because it really relies on, especially with Terrakion, it relies on you getting your active knocked out and then retaliating with Retaliate. Lol. So Black Belt's in there for that reason. So again, 30 trainers, a lot of trainers in this deck just because there's a ton of them. And next is the energy. Fighting energy, there's just 12 of those because obviously you need those. Just you don't need anything else. No double colorless, no nothing. So now I've looked at the basic skeleton list that I put together. Now let's look at some text that you can add in. First there's the obvious things like Plus Power, Switch, Super Scoop Up, and Pokegear, which are all good choices. Next is Shaman from Unleashed, which allows you to move your energies around when you place it down to the field, which again is just good in case you're against Durant or something and they catch you up. Your bench Terrakion, you can move all the energies to the active one, and Shaman's just a really good card in this type of deck. So the next one is Mewtwo EX, which is kind of obvious, just in case you want to be sure you can take down those other Mewtwo's, and obviously some double colorless energy would be necessary when adding that. Heavy Ball is another one. You could add 1 or 2 of those just so you can make 100% sure that you're getting a Pokemon next turn, and also you might just want a couple more search cards in the first place anyway. So next is Eviolite. This one, again, is not 100% necessary and will be kind of clunky with the EXP share, but it could defend your Pokemon from Landorus's Guy Hammer if you're fighting the mirror match, which would just be really bad if you set up your opponent's own attack. So Eviolite could be an interesting card to use. Next is you could add more Terrakion and make it more like a straight Terrakion deck with Landorus and Groudon as techs, but I don't recommend this if you want to focus on Groudon's attack and Landorus' start. So the second list I have for you today is Groudon EX and Kingdra Prime. Now this is an interesting idea. Basically the idea is to use Kingdra Prime's Spray Splash ability to set up even more KOs with Groudon EX's Giant Claw. So basically say you use Trample, and then all the bench is 10 damage, and then they're just 10 damage away from getting a full Giant Claw. You Spray Splash and set that Pokemon fully up for the Giant Claw attack, or whatever you want to call it. So let's look at the Pokemon now. 2 Groudon EX is pretty obvious. The Kingdra line I have is 4, 2, 3. Adding an extra one could be a good idea if you want to double Spray Splash all the time and always set up a Giant Claw, or just get a ton of damage on their field and completely annihilate their EXs and such. The next is 2 Absol Prime. This is your ideal starter. If you don't want to start Groudon EX for the match, just obviously set up Giant Claw with Eye of Disaster. Next is 1 Mewtwo EX, just pretty obvious idea. 1 Mewtwo. Just do it. Just frickin' do it. Just do it. Next, Cleffa, just because it's a good setup Pokemon. It's now into the trainers. Trainers, you have 4 Junkon, pretty obvious. 2 Communication, so you can set up your Kingdra is pretty easy. 3 Catcher, it's pretty obvious. 3 Rare Candy, essential for Stage 2 decks. 2 Rocky Helmet, just for pretty, standard reasons, just to set up Groudon EX's attack. More damage spread. 4 Collector, those are usually good in some decks like, this deck with the higher stage Pokemon. Next is the setup supporters. There's 3 Stages Training, just because that's a really great card, so you can get the missing pieces of your evolution line. If you have Horsey on the field and the Kingdra in your hand, you need the Rare Candy. You just use Sages and discard the Kingdra and get the Rare Candy, or whatever you need. Next is 3 Punch, because it's, again, really good card. Or Professor Oak's New Theory, Professor Oak's New Theory if you're a newbie and don't know what that stands for. P-O-N-T, Professor Oak's New Theory. And 2N, just because the deck's a little bit slow, and you might want to, help set up. And Absol, if you start with him, he might be kind of cannon fodder, and you die pretty quickly, because he only has 80 HP by Groudon. So N would be a good comeback card. Up to Energy, we have 11, we have 6 Fighting, 4 Prism in case you want to attack with Absol, which is it still is pretty good attack. You can take out weak basic Pokemon and Celebi Prime and stuff like that. And last we have 1 Rainbow Energy in case you want to use Kingdra Prime to take out things like Landorus and Donphan if Donphan ever wants to show his face around here again, which I doubt he will, but just an option to have. And he's still good against Landorus. So now we're going to talk about this list. Let's talk about techs we could add into this list. So for first tech we have Darkrai EX. Since you're running Prism and Rainbow Energy, you can just use Darkrai EX to help you get you through your treat. Again, I'm 99% sure that does work. If it doesn't, please tell me, because I would hate to be like the one idiot at League that's like, oh, well, never mind, apparently this deck's a terrible idea. So Darkrai EX could just be good to get some free retreat on your Pokemon. Next is Sky Arrow Bridge, so you can treat your Horseys and Absols with ease. It's kind of annoying when you have to set up your Groudon and then retreat your Absol. It's just all blah blah. Next is Eviolite for pretty obvious reasons. And then there's the obvious ones like Plus Power, Switch, Pokegear, and Super Rod. I meant to say Super Rod earlier. Sorry about that. I said Super Scoop Up. So yeah, that's the Kingdra Groudon list. This one I've probably done the most testing with. I don't know, just because I felt like it. So the last list I'm going to show you today is definitely the most interesting of the 3, because it's not exactly focused on spreading as much, it's more focused on helping you build up quickly. And this deck is none other than Groudon EX and Electrode Prime. Now, obviously, fighting is a very hard type to set up, and Electrode Prime is probably one of the only Pokemon that can help you set up. So let's look at the list and see how exactly the whole strategy is going to work. 2 Groudon EX, of course, 3 Electrode Prime, just so you can get them set up turn 2, like 80% of the time. Just, good idea to run 3-3. Next is Kyurem. This is going to be one of your main starters to help you spread pretty quickly. He's obviously very popular paired with Electrode anyway, so, might as well. He's just good. Helps you spread damage, and he's just a solid attacker overall. He could run the deck by himself. Next is 1 Mewtwo, obvious. 1 Cleffa, again, obvious. Next is the trainers. 4 Junk Arms, pretty obvious. 1 Communication, just to help you get Electrode Prime set up. 3 Pokemon Catcher. It's just, good card. 2 Level Ball helps you set up Electro Prime pretty fast, just a good card to help you search them out. 2 Research Record, which is so when you use Electro Prime's Dynamotor ability, you don't discard anything you really need, just make sure the energies are in the spot that you want them to be. Next is 1 Super Rod. Adding more of this could definitely be a good idea, but obviously the reason you want this is to recover cards you get rid of with Energy Might, like, did I say Dynamotor earlier? Frickin' Energy Might. And you can use Super Rod to get them back into your deck. 3 Rocky Helmet. It's definitely a better choice. Since you don't have the best way of setting up your attack, Kyurem isn't gonna help you all the time, so Rocky Helmet is definitely gonna be running higher copies in this deck. 4 Collector, to help you set up your Voltorbs and stuffs. 3 Charon, because it's definitely a good card in cake builds. This is pretty similar to a cake build, so Charon's definitely a good card to run. 3 Pont, good. 2 Ends, since you're gonna be killing yourself with Energy Might anyway, you're gonna be buying on prizes, and you're gonna want to use this to help get back into the game. And Black Belt, this is an interesting one. I put 2 of them in decks, since obviously you're gonna use Electro Prime, knock yourself out, and this way you can knock out EXs with ease. Since they're gonna have 2 damage, then it's 120, then use Black Belt, and then that's 180 altogether, which is just enough to knock out EXs. So that's definitely a good card to have this deck. In Energy, you got 4 Fighting, 4 Prism, and 4 Rainbow. Just because when you use Energy Might, Rainbow doesn't actually do damage to you. And yeah, this deck, I'm not enormous on it. I mean, it's just a decent idea I had, and I'm definitely going to test out some of these in the future, and I may update you on how well all these ideas do with more testing, but this is definitely one interesting idea. And for techs, of course, there's Twins, in case you don't need to KO any X and you want to just get the cards you need with after Energy Might. Absol Prime would also be a good idea. And there's not as much room for text in this deck because there's only 5 open spots, by the way. You could add in a Cobalion just because, he's good in cake anyway. Decent pair. And then there's Eviolite, which, again, all basic attackers, just a good idea. So that does it for the deck lists of the day.
So I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Mix Up. Have any ideas or suggestions, feel free to point them out in the comments. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys for more TCG videos in the future. Later!